In this video, I'll be going over an example that demonstrates the use of inheritance and polymorphism. We have the following instructions for the code. So first of all, we have a person that has a name, social security number, and occupation, where the occupation dynamically allocates memory for a string. So we have a class called person with these three attributes, and occupation is a pointer to a string. A student is a person and has a unique ID, major, GPA, and school, where the school dynamically allocates memory for a string. So a student inherits from person and has the four attributes, where school is a pointer to a string. And a teacher similarly is a person and has a subject and department, where department dynamically allocates memory for a string. So from these three classes, it's obvious that our base class is the class called person, and the student and teacher classes inherit from the class person. Okay, each class has a print function that changes depending on the type of object created. So this can be done using the virtual keyword, and you must properly deallocate memory created within each class. So here we need to make the destructors, and also you should include setters and getters with for the appropriate attributes. And in the main, create a person array of size 3, where each index contains a different object type. So this is the polymorphism part of the question, and develop your code accordingly. Okay, so first off, let's start with the first step. And let's make our base class. So base class. Okay, so we have the class person, and the person has protected, not private, because this is our base class and we should inherit from them. So string name, string SSN, and string a pointer to a string for the occupation. Okay, now for the functions, we have a default constructor, and let's randomly assign the default attributes. Let's just say person, name, and for SSN, let's just say person SSN, and for the occupation, let's say new string, and let's pass in person occupation. And we use the new here because occupation is a pointer to a string. Okay, and that's it for default constructor. Now, I personally prefer using this syntax instead of, for example, opening this up and then saying name is equal to person name, because I find it makes the code a bit cleaner, but up to your personal preference to decide which type you would like to use. Okay, and let's have another constructor where you pass in string underscore name, you pass in the SSN, keep it the same, and you pass in string occupation. Okay, and let's give it name, and SSN is underscore SSN, and occupation is not underscore occupation, it's new string, and then you pass in underscore occupation, and the function is empty. Okay, so now each class must have a print function, and we should also include setters and getters, and we need a destructor. So let's start off with the setters and getters. So if you're not sure what a setter and getter is, basically it's just a function where you just either change the attribute or you retrieve the value of the attribute. So for example, to set a value, then you need to use void and then set, for example, name, and then you pass it in a string name, and then in the function you just say name equals n. That's it. And for the getter, you need to return the value in the attribute called name. So string get name, you pass in nothing because you want to return name. It's that simple. And similarly for the SSN, we have void set SSN string SSN. So we have SSN equals SSN, and then string return SSN. pass in nothing, and you just return SSN. Okay. Now, next up is, let's do the print function. So because it says that the print function changes depending on the type of object created. So this gives us a heads up that we should use the keyword, the virtual keyword, before the class, before the function definition. So virtual, let's have void print, and let's pass an output stream, a reference to an output stream called out. And the function, instead of cout, we have out, and then you print the name, and let's have name. Let's comma separate the values, have SSN and SSN, and then you have the occupation, and finally a dereference to occupation, and then end line. Okay, so here we're passing in an output stream. This is just because it's good practice to have different types of output streams instead of just, you can easily just see out the statement. But for example, let's say you want to write this into a file. So you need to pass in an object that's not cout. So you use this output stream function parameter. It's just for good practice. Okay, so the print function is done. And now we need the destructor for the occupation attribute. And we know that destructors for polymorphism also use the keyword, the virtual keyword, and let's have person. Okay, so we just delete occupation. And let's have a cout statement just to make sure that the person destructor is called, just so we can double check that everything is going correctly. Okay, so that's the base class done. Now next, let's do the student class. And let's just copy this down here just so we can see. Okay, so a student is a person. So this is a relationship, means that the student inherits from the person class. Now this is done by class student colon public person. Okay, and now because we don't have a student as a base class for another class, so we can say private. But if, for example, we had another class that inherits from student, then it should also be protected. But in this case, we don't, so we use private. So a student has a unique ID, major, GPA, and school. So we have string ID, string major, string, actually double, GPA, and a pointer to a string for school. Okay, now for the functions or the methods, we have the default constructor that inherits from person. So it calls the person default constructor because we also need to initialize the 3 attributes, name, SSN, and occupation, for the student, along with these 4. So in total, a student will have 7 attributes. 3 of them are initialized in the person function, and 4 of them are initialized in the student constructor. So we call the person default constructor, and then we pass the ID underscore ID. Actually, let's give it just 1, 2, 3, and then major, student major, GPA. Let's just initialize it with 4, default value, and school, new string, and let's just say student school. Okay, so that's the default constructor done. Now we need a non-default constructor where you pass in the name, you pass in the SSN, you pass in the major, you also give it the GPA and the school. Okay. And then you call the person constructor and you give it the name, the SSN, and if you noticed here we didn't pass in the occupation because we're gonna give it here as student. So what this does, if we go back to the person constructor, it will take a string, so this variable will have the value of student, which is here, and then it will create a dynamically allocate memory, and then it will have a pointer to string, which is student. Okay, and then major, you pass in major, and then GPA takes GPA, and school will have a new string for underscore school. Okay. Now let's do the setters and getters. Okay, now for the print function, void print. Now we can have the virtual keyword before void, but since we already know that this class will inherit from person, then all we need to do is after you pass in the output stream out, you just need to say override. So what this does is when the print function is called for an object of type student, it will override this print function. Now, because we want to print the attributes for the student as well as the student attributes that we took from the person, we also, within this function, we need to call the person print function and pass it the output stream. So again, this function, the print function of a student, will override the print function of a person, but because we also need to print the attributes from the person, we will call the print function of the person within the print function of the student. I hope that makes sense. So then you output major, and then the GPA, and school. Okay, so that's the print function done. And then finally we have the destructor, where you also, similar to the print, you need to override, and then you delete school. Then see out student destructor is called, and done. Okay, now that is the student class done. And then finally we have the teacher class, that inherits from person, and similarly to the student class, it will be the exact same steps, so I will just have the code ready instead of taking too much time. Okay, now that I filled in the teacher class and we have all three classes ready, we can move on to the main. So in the main, create a person array of size 3 where each index contains a different object type. Now this is a clear indication that we have polymorphism because a person will act as 3 different object types. So now for polymorphism, we need 3 steps. Step 1, we need pointers. Step 2, we need to assign a child to a parent. So a student to a person, because person is our base class, which is also called parent class. And third of all, we need the virtual keyword. Now we already have the virtual keyword in the class functions for the print and the destructor. So that's step 3 is done. So step 1 is the pointers. So we create an array of a person array, but it's a pointer, and let's call it people of size 3. And then so that's step 1 done. And then we're left with assigning a child to a parent. So people at index 0. So let's say for the first index, let's have it of type person, and let's give the name Alice. Let's have a SSN of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then occupation, let's just say unemployed. and then people at index 1. Now let's assign a child to a parent. So let's have of type student, and let's name him Bob with SSN 987.654.321. And if we check the constructor, we have SSN major GPA in school. So major, let's say computer science. GPA is a double, so let's say he's a good student with 3.8 GPA, and the university, let's say AUS, or the school. And then people at index 2, so our last object, and let's have it as a teacher. So teacher, so we pass in a name, let's say Charlie, and the SSN 123.789.654, just some arbitrary values, and a subject, let's say mathematics, and the department, let's say science department. Okay, so that's all 3 steps done, and now let's check by printing all 3 objects. So for I equals 0, then I less than 3, I plus plus, and then for each index of the array, let's call the print function of that object. So people at index I dot print, and let's pass it a cout, which is the console terminal, and let's have a line break between each print. And then because in the main we dynamically allocated memory, we should also delete these, so free the memory. And this is different than the memory created within the class that's called in the destructor. So this step is a must. So it will be the same for loop, but instead of printing, we will just delete people at index I. Okay, that should be it, and let's run and check. Okay, so let's go to the class and check the print function. So a person will print the name, so we have Alice, the SSN, and the occupation, so that's fine. And then for the student, it will call the person print, so name, SSN, occupation, and then it will also print the major, the GPA, and the school. And now notice here that school, we said that it's AUS, but it's printing some random values. And this is because I did not dereference school. So it printed the address of the variable, but I want to print the value, so you dereference. So let's run the code again. This is a common error that you can do, but you have to double check everything. And it's easy to trace, to be honest. Okay, so now that this is corrected, the student print is working perfectly. And then for the teacher print, it will call the person print, so the name, SSN, occupation, and then it will also print the subject and department. So that's working perfectly. And now for the destructors, always called at the end. So we have person destructor is called, that's for the index 0, this object, and then student destructor is called, and then person destructor is called. So now notice how 2 destructors are called for 1 object. Now this is because student inherits from person. So when you create a student object, you will create a pointer to school, so this destructor will be called, which is fine. And then also when you create a student, you will create a pointer to occupation. So this is also another memory that's been dynamically allocated, so you need to delete that by the person destructor. And it's in the order of student person, because the destructors are bottom top. They use the bottom top logic instead of the top down logic. So bottom will be the inherited class, and the top is the parent or the base class. And then similarly for the third object, which is the teacher destructor is called, and then the person destructor is called for the same logic. And that is the inheritance and polymorphism example, and hopefully this helped you understand the topic more. Now, one more thing is that it's important to note that the print function and the destructor are both virtual functions. But if you notice that in the print function, we specifically call the parent function for the print, but in the destructor, we don't call the person destructor. Now, this is because in C++, whenever you have a virtual keyword before the destructor, the program already knows that, okay, call the teacher destructor or the student destructor first, and then come back to the person. But however, in the print function, because it's not a built-in function in C++, you wrote it, you have to specifically call the person print function.